most precious, sweetest that ever.
In this part of his sermon, Jesus shifts to the subject of physical concerns. Now, we all have them to some extent, but they need to be kept in perspective. Jesus teaches his followers to get their priorities right and to not be anxious. Now, Luke's account has the same content we find here, but he records different occasions when Jesus taught the same things. So part of this material is in Luke chapter 11, most of it is in chapter 12, and at least one statement is in chapter 16. For this study, we'll stay anchored to Matthew 6. Let's read Matthew chapter 6, verse 19 through 21. Do not lay up for yourselves treasures upon earth, where moth and rust destroy, and where thieves break in and steal. But lay up for yourselves treasures in heaven, where neither moth nor rust destroys, and where thieves do not break in or steal. For where your treasure is, there will your heart be also. To understand what Jesus means by this, it may be helpful to rule out what he does not mean. In this case, we recognize Jesus is not forbidding anyone from making a living or doing well at that. Paul writes in 1 Timothy 5, verse 8, "But if anyone does not provide for his own, and especially for those of his household, he has denied the faith and is worse than an unbeliever." But what does it mean to lay up treasures? The term lay up is from the Greek thesarizo, to amass, reserve, hoard, store away. Now, does this mean it's wrong to have a savings account, a retirement plan, or an inheritance to pass along to our children? No, the question is, what comes first? Where are we ultimately laying up treasures? Down here or up there? What do we really set our affections on? What do we consider lasting and truly valuable? Again, it's not inherently wrong to have wealth, but it can become a distraction and a source of pride or self-assurance. The pursuit of wealth especially needs to be guarded against. For the love of money is a root of all sorts of evil, and some, by longing for it, have wandered away from the faith and pierced themselves with many a pang. 1 Timothy 6, verse 10. In the ancient world, wealth was often measured in fine clothing and gold. But clothing gets old and worn out, eaten away by moths. Gold and other precious materials corrode and fade away. And that's if they're not stolen first. But no matter who possesses it, they still don't last. And neither do we, for that matter. Our life is but a vapor that appears for a little while and then vanishes away. All the more reason to lay up treasures in heaven rather than upon earth. We can't take earthly treasure with us. It wouldn't do us any good anyway. But what we do with it now and our attitude toward it matters. The pursuit of God, truth, His kingdom and will, praising Him and seeking to please Him, all this lays up treasures in heaven, which nothing and no one can take away. As Jesus said, "For where your treasure is, there will your heart be also." There's a direct connection. Wherever you consider your treasure to be, that you will pursue. Your heart will be in it. Conversely, whatever you pursue, whatever you set your heart on, that's where your treasure will be. We have a great example of the right attitude in the patriarchs like Abraham, who by faith left a relatively comfortable life in his home country to follow God's will for him. Hebrews 11, verse 15 and 16 says, "And indeed, if they had been thinking of that country from which they went out, they would have had opportunity to return. But as it is, they desire a better country, that is, a heavenly one. Therefore God is not ashamed to be called their God, for He has prepared a city for them. Or Moses, who by faith chose to endure ill treatment with the people of God than to enjoy the passing pleasures of sin, considering the reproach of Christ greater riches than the treasures of Egypt, for he was looking to the reward. Verses 25 and 26. So what are we looking to? What do we consider greater riches? Jesus expounds on this further in Matthew 6, 22 and 23. The lamp of the body is the eye. If therefore your eye is clear, your whole body will be full of light. But if your eye is bad, your whole body will be full of darkness. If therefore the light that is in you is darkness, how great is the darkness? Now Jesus repeats these words in Luke 11, 34 to 36, while rebuking the sign-seeking generation. The basic idea of this metaphor is to ask the question, where is our focus? What do we have our sights set on? The eye receives and processes light, guiding the direction of the whole body. So if our spiritual eye is clear, if we have a healthy perspective, prioritizing spiritual things above material things, our whole life will be illumined. But if your eye is bad, if we're too preoccupied with worldly concerns and earthly pursuits to listen to the will of the Lord, our path will be full of darkness. In other words, if the material things around us and the need to pursue them dominates our vision, we are blind. Verse 24, no one can serve two masters, for either he will hate the one and love the other, or he will hold to one and despise the other. You cannot serve God and mammon, or riches. Serve is the key word in this axiomatic statement. It refers to loyal devotion and affection. And it just doesn't work to serve two different masters, each with his own demands and expectations. The path toward God and the path toward riches go in different directions. Now, they might overlap for a short time, but soon enough there will be a fork in the road, and a choice has to be made of which way to go. So one master will receive your full devotion, while the other will be left behind. And it's up to us to choose which will be which. Now, his use of the words hate and despise probably are not meant to indicate malice, but lesser love, lesser devotion. So choose to love God most with your whole being, and also trust him. Verse 25, for this reason I say to you, do not be anxious for your life as to what you shall eat or what you shall drink, nor for your body as to what you shall put on. Is not life more than food, and the body than clothing? So more than not setting our sights on riches, don't worry about necessities. Whether physical sustenance, what to eat and drink, or physical covering, what to put on. Life is more than these things. And worrying about them is precious time and energy wasted on things God knows we need and promises to his people. Jesus gives a simple example from nature to drive home the point about sustenance. Verse 26, look at the birds of the air, that they do not sow, neither do they reap, nor gather into barns, and yet your heavenly Father feeds them. Are you not worth much more than they? Birds don't plant and harvest like we do, but they are constantly working, scavenging each day for supplies to build their nests and for food for themselves and their chicks. Each day is a fight for survival. And although their day-to-day livelihood may seem insecure or tenuous, it works. The Father feeds them. Each day they have enough. And as human beings made in God's image, we are worth much more than the birds. So we have no need to worry about having enough. Now, Jesus isn't saying we can just sit around idly, not working. Again, even the birds keep busy. Or that we can't gather our harvest into a barn. His point is not to be anxious. There's a difference between preparing and worrying. The farmer who plants and cultivates his crop isn't necessarily worried, but he is preparing, working, and trusting God to provide, whether his crop is successful or not. So trusting in God does not negate the need to be productive. Proverbs 14 verse 23 says, "In all labor there is profit, but mere talk leads only to poverty." So again, work is necessary, but anxiety accomplishes nothing. And constant worrying about our most basic needs reflects a lack of trust in God. Verse 27, "And which of you, by being anxious, can add a single cubit to his life's span?" Now, the Greek word helikia refers to maturity in years or in size. So this can mean length of life or height, stature. But a single cubit is about 18 inches. That would be quite a lot to add to your height and would seem to undermine Jesus' point that anxiety does not add even a little. So I think he is probably referring to the length of our life. And if we think about our life as a road we are walking, worrying doesn't add a single step. In fact, stress and anxiety can take years off. In verses 28 through 30, he gives another example from nature to drive home the point about clothing. "And why are you anxious about clothing? Observe how the lilies of the field grow. They do not toil, nor do they spin. Yet I say to you that even Solomon in all his glory did not clothe himself like one of these. But if God so arrays the grass of the field, which is alive today and tomorrow is thrown into the furnace, will he not much more do so for you, O men of little faith?" Now, it may be true when we open up our closets full of clothing, we have anxiety about which outfit to choose, what to put on. But that's not quite the anxiety Jesus is referring to here. Jesus is talking about being anxious about having anything to wear, when maybe our options are running low, worrying about having clothes. God adorns even the grass of the field with lilies. And my understanding is in the springtime, the hillsides of Galilee are blooming with lilies of all colors. So this was a familiar sight to the people. Without any work at the loom, more glory covers the field than even Solomon had with all his luxuriant wealth. Yet the grass is such a little thing, not worth very much, except to be used as fuel in the furnace. So if God is willing to clothe the field, he will certainly clothe us. In verse 31, Jesus begins to summarize this part of the sermon. "Do not be anxious then, saying, 'What shall we eat? Or what shall we drink? Or with what shall we clothe ourselves?' For all these things the Gentiles eagerly seek, for your heavenly Father knows that you need all these things." The heathen nations who did not know God were anxious over physical necessities and eagerly striving for more. And again, it's not that we don't need these things. It's precisely because we need them that we should not worry about them. The God who created us and loves us knows what we need, and he will provide. So what should we be seeking after? Verse 33, but seek first his kingdom and his righteousness, and all these things shall be added to you. Our highest priority and goal should be God's kingdom and righteousness. That's what we diligently pursue above all else. And if we will recognize his sovereign authority and freely submit to him, to his will and his commandments, everything else will fall into its rightful place in our lives. This is God's promise for our everyday life and the normal course of life. Now, I give that qualification because faithful people are sometimes called upon to suffer for righteousness' sake. And in times of persecution, even what they need to survive is sometimes taken away from them. The Hebrew writer in chapter 11 recalls the faith of many who were persecuted, tortured, and afflicted to the point of becoming destitute, even killed for their allegiance to God, especially in verses 35 through 40. They were willing to endure for the sake of the better resurrection, and they gained approval through their faith. No matter what, God cares for his own. And so the point is to simply trust him and obey. Verse 34, therefore do not be anxious for tomorrow will care for itself. Each day has enough trouble of its own. Now, it's not wrong to prepare for the future. In fact, with most aspects of life, it would be unwise and improper not to think ahead and make prior arrangements. But we should not become so anxious and distracted by tomorrow that we lose sight of today, or so wrapped up in future possibilities that we neglect present responsibilities. And James also touches on this topic in James 4, 13 through 17. There are enough problems to deal with today. Don't borrow any from tomorrow. Just do what is right now, trusting God, and let tomorrow, if there is a tomorrow, take care of itself.